Absolutely. Oh, man. I'm so glad to be back here. I was here just about a year ago. In fact, I think the church had just opened the new facility. It was really cool to be in a packed house in New Jersey. And it's so funny because I travel all over the country. A lot of you know that I was born and raised in California, lived most of my life there. Eventually, I became a refugee and moved to Texas 3.5 years ago. Like so many people are doing from blue states, and I still travel all over the country. Right now, I'm kind of in the midst of an Eastern Seaboard tour, something I've been promising to do for a long time. So I was in Maryland last night. Monica, our regional director who's here, she and I both drove 3 hours from Southern Maryland last night, arrived here early this morning, got a few hours of sleep, and then we're here. And one of the reasons it's so important for me to be here is because I think that there are people around the country that think there's no hope in the blue states. And in fact, if you travel around and you talk to people, a lot of people in the red states, that's what they say. And you know, we meet a lot of folks from New Jersey, in Texas, in Tennessee, in South Carolina, in Florida. And look, I don't blame them for leaving. I understand I did the same thing, but I'm not giving up on the blue states, right? I don't believe that there's a place in the United States of America where there's no hope. And the reason that I don't believe that is because I travel to all of these places, because I get to hang out with people like you in all of these places. So no matter where it is, you know, if you're in the heart of Texas and you mention Manhattan, people will just, you know, oh yeah, right. There are great patriots in Manhattan. You mention New Jersey, you're like, oh yeah, Newark, great place, right? They don't know. And they don't know because that's not what they see on the news, right? That's not what they see in the top line political results. And that's all people are watching because that's what the national media feeds us. You know, so I was sitting in the back of the room and I was listening to the panel up here. Great panel, by the way. Was that incredible? I love these guys. So I'm listening, and it's a different experience for me than you guys are having in the room. And the reason it's a different experience for me is I've been involved with the Convention of States since before there was a Convention of States, right? And I got involved because Mike Ferris, the founder of the homeschool movement in America, came to me and he said, are you happy with what you've accomplished in politics? And I think maybe for a lot of people in my situation might have said yes. You know, God blessed me. I stumbled into the Tea Party movement. I ended up founding the largest Tea Party organization in America. We grew that to 23 million members, 3,200 chapters across the country. We're partially responsible for the largest political swing class in the history of Congress since 1938. Back in 2010, a lot of you folks participated in that. All those people went to Washington, D.C. in a wave. And, you know, my feeling when that happened was, I don't know how you guys felt when you saw it happen, I thought, okay, we win. I mean, that's pretty much, I was so naive, I would say, at that point, that I actually thought it was game over. Because what I thought is, you spoke. Like, you explained very clearly how unhappy you were with what was going on in Washington, D.C. And the Tea Party movement was very clear with what it wanted. It was not a complex message. Fiscal responsibility, free markets, and fidelity to the Constitution. It wasn't complicated. And we thought we sent this huge class to Washington, D.C. We flipped the House of Representatives. We thought they would understand. And then they got eaten by the swamp. And it was fast. It was stunningly fast. It was breathtakingly fast. Literally, and I do mean this quite literally, I was there when they got sworn in. And we held sort of an orientation for new members before they got sworn in because we wanted to make sure that the swamp didn't get them before we did. We wanted to remind them that the Tea Party movement elected them, not the lobbyists in Washington, D.C., not John Boehner and all his cronies in leadership, that we elected them, the people elected them. And so we held an orientation for the new members before they got sworn in. And this is when I started to realize how deep the swamp was. So 2 days before this huge event we were having in the Capitol, in a beautiful facility, Ed Meese was our keynote speaker. This was serious stuff. All this new class was invited, and the lobby class in Washington, D.C., a bunch of the powerful lobbyists decided instead, they would hold an event at the exact same time as our event. And they started to make calls to all these freshman members and tell them, look, you know, that's fine, you know, these Tea Party people, that's cute and all, but if you want to know where the power is, you better come to this meeting. And the leadership in Congress started calling the freshmen and telling them, yeah, you need to attend this one being put on by these very important lobbyists, not by the people who elected you, right? And so this most people don't know about this, a war broke out. And we had a decision to make at that moment. See, because all of these people, they didn't have office phone numbers yet. They didn't have congressional emails yet. They were all physically in Washington, D.C. at the time. And so we needed to figure out, how do we let them know that the people are your bosses, not the lobbyists, not the leaders in Congress. Well, how do we do that? You can't email them because they don't have official email accounts yet. You can't call them on their office phones. They don't have those yet. We had the personal cell phone numbers of all those newly elected members. And so we had to powwow and decide, what do we do? I mean, this is pretty hardcore stuff, right? Do you give out their personal email or their personal cell phone numbers to thousands of their newly minted constituents to let them rain hellfire down on them? Sounds pretty good to me, right? Didn't seem like that hard of a decision to me. But there were political consequences to think about, right? Really, because you're definitely going to make some people angry. But we came to the point where it felt like we didn't have a choice. And so we did that. And so we put out, widely distributed their personal cell phone numbers in their own districts to everybody that we knew that was in our organization. Remember, we had 23 million people, so in every district we had a lot of people. And we said, call them and tell them what event they need to be at. And they did. And these guys, these men and women, they freaked out because their cell phones stopped working, essentially. Their families couldn't reach them, their business associates couldn't reach them, their staffs couldn't reach them, their voicemails were completely full, their phones were just blowing up constantly. And they were mad. Like, they were really mad at us. And I got a lot of really mad calls from Boehner's office, from the leadership, from some of these lobby firms, from some politicians in DC. This is not how it's played. You violated the rules. And we just said, hey, what else were we supposed to do? And ultimately what came out of that was 95% of them came to our meeting because they were scared, because they realized they worked for us, right? And I thought, okay, we showed them. So then I was sure we won, right? We elected them. We got them to toe the line on the first day that they were there in Washington, D.C., so we proved ourselves. I could not have been more wrong. They came to that event. We had a great event, kumbaya, all of that stuff. Literally within days, some of them just stopped returning calls. Within weeks, a whole bunch of them. Within months, most of them. And a couple of years later, we had lost almost all of them. There's a handful from the Tea Party movement that retained their fidelity to those values, but virtually all of them we lost. So 9 years ago, this August, when Mike Ferris approached me and said, are you happy with what you've accomplished in politics? I could have said, yeah, of course. We helped elect the largest swing class. You know, we had all this power, and I've been on TV, and I know all these people. And instead I said, no, I'm miserable. It feels like I've wasted several years of my life. I've been away from my family. I've traveled. I've shut down my business. It kind of sucks, to be honest with you. And I'm thinking of getting out. And Mike said, you got to stay in. You're just approaching the wrong problem. You think we have a personnel problem in Washington, D.C. How many people think we got a personnel problem in Washington? And Mike said that's not the problem. He said the problem is we have a structure problem. We've broken our structure of government, and until you fix that, it doesn't matter who you send to D.C. See, if you put good people into a bad system, you always get a bad result. There's no exception to that. A lot of you people in this room are business people. Right? So if you hire a bunch of good people, but your business structure is bad, you're going to get a bad result. If you pay more for the products than you sell them for, doesn't matter how good your salespeople are, you're going out of business, right? And so we've broken our structure of government over the last 115, 120 years so badly that it honestly doesn't matter who we elect. Now, I want to be really clear about something. We got to elect the best people we possibly can. We have a core baseline obligation at every level. Here in your township, in a county, in a city, in a state, at the national level, to vote for, to campaign for, to raise money for, to knock on doors for, to work for the best people we possibly can find. If we don't do that, we got no excuse. Right, so we've got to do that, but that's not enough. That's not the solution. And so Mike said, look, there is a solution. It's in Article 5 of the Constitution. It's the second clause. It says that we, the people, have the right to call a convention of states to propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny. Does it sound like a good idea to restrain federal tyranny? Seems like a good idea to me. So when Mike said that to me, I might have applauded on the phone. Because, yeah, That sounded like a really good idea to me. And he laid out how it works and his plan for making it work. And I thought, okay, I like this idea. I'm in. So I want you to put yourself in my shoes. Back then, 9 years ago, there is no convention of states. You look at the history, it's never been done in all of American history. Never been done in all of American history. And Mike's proposing to me that we're going to do this thing that's never been done, right? And I'm a little bit crazy. I like doing things that have never been done. So I said yes. And I had a board of an organization I was just starting, and they agreed to take on this project. And I'm tying this all back to seeing these people sit here because no matter what I could have imagined, no matter how big I thought, no matter how wild my dreams might have been, no matter how bold it might have been to try this, I could not have imagined this. Because God is so much more miraculous than I can even imagine. And to hear these people sit up here, like, my greatest dream has always been to build a national family. Like, people who actually care about each other, people who are in the fight because they love their country, because they love their God, but because they also love each other, because they're willing to stand in a fight together. You know, if you've ever been in the military, do we have any veterans in here? Raise your hand. God bless you guys. Thank you. Appreciate you guys. No doubt you've heard of the concept of band of brothers, right? For those who've been in the military, especially if you've been in combat, if you've been in those situations, you know there's a special bond. And it's a necessary bond, by the way. You got to know that the guy standing next to you is going to give his life for you. That if you get injured, he's going to carry you out, that he's willing to put himself on the line. You got to understand that. And this is why it's so important to me to build a family, because if you ask people, what are you willing to die for? People will often say, I'll die for my family, right? I'll do anything for my family. Well, we're in a war. And I'm not going to soft pedal this stuff. We're in a war for America. And it's a cold civil war right now. And the pastor and I were talking about this. There's a cold civil war going on in the United States of America right now, but it is no doubt a civil war. We live in a time that I never imagined in my wildest dreams. We live in a time when Marxism is in the White House, when Marxism is in the Congress, when Marxism runs our colleges, when Marxism runs all of these administrative agencies, when people who hate America are running all the agencies and all the government stuff and all the companies that should love America. Right? We live in a time when literally, I never imagined I would see this in my life, when people actually openly say, a lot of people and a lot of leaders, that you should be able to kill 9-month-old babies. Some of them say 9.5-month-old babies or toddlers, right? I mean, this is crazy stuff. We live in a time when we're being told that we should teach our children that if you're white, you are a racist and an oppressor, and if you are a person of color, that you are oppressed or a victim. We live in a time like that. When I grew up in the era when we were taught that what Dr. Martin Luther King said was just a given, right? You just judge people by the content of their character, not a color of their skin. We didn't have to discuss that. Like, it was just a given. It was just part of the fabric of society. And now we're told by these Marxists, by these America-hating baby killers, that no, you should absolutely first judge people by the color of their skin. It's horrible. They're not teaching critical race theory. I hate when they call it critical race theory. What they're teaching our children, and what they're imposing on our society, it's called racism. Right? It's just so we live in a time, from my perspective, that's a reason for a war. This is what we're having a war over. We're having a war over people who believe that you should just randomly kill babies whenever you want if it's inconvenient for you. That you should teach our kids that they're racist. How about the fact that you should indoctrinate sexually 5-year-old kids, 6-year-old kids? You should teach them some kind of bizarre gender ideology. Men are women, women are men, both are neither, everything's fluid. There are 157 genders, and all of them more important than anything you could possibly believe. We live in a time when we are at war because their intent is to destroy this country. This is what Marxists have always wanted, to tear this country down. This is the very nature of Marxism. You must tear down the capitalist free market system and rebuild from the ashes and rebuild a communist Marxist utopia. This all comes from Marx, Karl Marx, right? You know what Karl Marx was absolutely right about? Absolutely 100% right about? Nothing. Literally. And I mean that sincerely, not a single thing. If you read Marx, if you can read Das Kapital, it's a very hard book to read. It's not very hard because it's so intellectual. It's very hard to read because it's so stupid. It's internally incomprehensible. It makes no sense. And so what happens is even people who believe in Marxism, they read Das Kapital and they study Karl Marx and they think, oh, it's so complicated. It's brilliant. No, it's so complicated because it's so stupid. It's never worked in all of human history. And people say, oh, we just haven't really tried it. Listen, my question is this. Let's say we want to consider trying communism here in the United States. How many people have to die before we decide it doesn't work? You know, the numbers minimum, over 100 million people dead to communism. I think it's probably closer to 150 million people dead to communism all over the world. You know why we still have communism in the world? Because we never had the Nuremberg trials for communism. See, when the Berlin Wall fell, and you saw this stuff, when the Berlin Wall fell, you know who was held accountable? Nobody. Nobody said, we want you to see the crimes against humanity. We want you to see how people starve. Right? We want you to understand what happened. We didn't paint that picture for the world, and so they slinked off slowly into the shadows, and a lot of them ended up, by the way, being reintegrated into East Bloc governments. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to sit with a bunch of ex-spooks, right? Guys from the National Security Agency, CIA, international spy type guys that were all out of the business. And a friend of mine invited me to this meeting. It was literally just sitting around shooting the breeze with these guys. And one of the things they said is, oh, you think communism is dead? It's not dead. All of these guys are integrated into all of these governments. If you look a lot of the East Bloc, the old East Bloc governments, and you look high up in the governments, they're ex-KGB officers. Vladimir Putin, for God's sake. You know where Vladimir Putin was when the Berlin Wall came down? Anybody know that? He was a mid-level KGB officer in East Berlin. He witnessed the wall came down, and he said the greatest tragedy in human history was the fall of the Soviet Empire. That's what we're facing in the United States of America. And I want to go one level deeper because it's not just Marxism. We're standing in a church, and I'll say it whether we're standing in a church or not, what we're facing in the United States of America today is the bold, blatant, obvious, facial, out in the open rise of Satan in the United States of America. It's absolutely the face of evil. So what do you do when you face evil? You fight. This is the deal, you fight. And so the question is, what do you do to fight? Like you personally, what do you do if you're going to fight? You come to a meeting like this. I think it's great that you come to a meeting like this. I think it's really important. You sign the petition, that's great. You get involved in politics, that's good, right? But the question is, what are you going to put on the line? Right? How much time are you going to commit? You heard these people all committing their time. I guarantee if you talk to them, if you said, are you a busy person? All of them are too busy to do this. All of us are too busy to be involved in this. We got kids, we got grandkids, we got businesses we're running, we got volunteer stuff we do for our churches and our communities. All of you, great citizens involved in all that stuff. But if we're all too busy, then we're going to lose our country. You know, Chris asked, are you willing to look in the faces of your kids and your grandkids? Reagan said every generation has to fight. We're only one generation from losing liberty. So the question is, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? You know, for me, there came a point, I made way more money. I did really well as an attorney. There came a point like, am I really willing to tell my kids I'm not willing to fight for my country? Now, I remember really poignantly when my son took the oath in the United States Marines. And he did 4 years in the Marine Corps. He's graduating from law school now. But I remember standing there as he was taking the oath. And I remember I was surprised by the oath. Like, I didn't serve in the military. It wasn't a tradition in my family. I never even thought about it. So my son goes into the Marine Corps. He's taking his oath. And he swears an oath to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I was completely blown away by that. I never heard that before. He didn't swear an oath to the United States Marine Corps. It wasn't to a flag, it wasn't to a government, it was to the Constitution of the United States of America. And I remember watching him doing that and thinking, he just agreed to die, to literally put the blood on the line to protect the Constitution of the United States of America. This is a pretty incredible thing against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So here he was, an 18-year-old kid with the willingness to take that oath. I remember looking at him and thinking, man, if he can do that, if he's willing to do that, what am I willing to do? Right? What am I going to dedicate my life to doing? Am I willing to put it on the line to defend the Constitution? What I'm asked to do is much smaller than what he was asked to do. And so I vowed that I would do that. 9 years ago, we started this organization. I never imagined that people would sit up here and talk about it the way that we imagined, that it would be a family, that people would believe that they're in the fight together, that they would believe that they're doing something important and meaningful to save the nation. Somebody up here talked about how you sign up for an organization, you send in the email, and then nothing happens. Nobody calls you, you're not really, or they call you and they go, hey, you need to go do this thing, and you're going, I don't even know what I'm doing, right? Nobody trains you, nobody takes care of you, you're not part of a family. And we just said we can't do that. If we're going to build this army, if we're going to build the largest self-governing grassroots army in American history, we've got to do it based on relationship. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. And by the way, I'm a slow learner. I accepted Christ at 51 years old. I was raised as a secular Jew in Los Angeles, California. It's a long story all on its own, but politics brought me to the Lord. It doesn't usually work that way. It's kind of the opposite usually, I think. So I'm a little bit weird. But I bring that heart to what I do in politics. I don't understand people who say faith and politics don't mix. I don't get that. Because here's the thing that I don't understand. If you're a person of faith, how do you not bring your faith to everything that you do? I've read a lot of scripture now in the last 9 years. I just turned 60 this year, and I'm still looking for that part that says, hey, you can't be a Christian in politics. I can't find that part. I've had this argument with pastors. I'm no pastor, I'm no theologian, but I've had this argument with we can't do politics in our church. Really? That was the 11th commandment, right? Thou shalt not do politics in church. I haven't seen that one. I read all of Jesus' teachings. It doesn't say, hey, what you really need to do is sit down and be demure while the authorities abuse you. See, Jesus was not demure, was he? No. We do a weird thing in our society with Jesus Christ, in my opinion. It's like we turn him into this effeminate, weak person who was like, I don't really want to offend anybody. I'm a super nice guy. Just can go around and be nice to everybody. I don't know about you guys, but the Jesus Christ I follow, he was one bad dude, right? He was willing to walk into a city and tell the Pharisees that they were hypocrites. That's death sentence kind of stuff. That's blasphemy kind of stuff. He was willing to kick the table over in the temple, and he yelled at them. He wasn't gentle. We're not asked to be gentle. We're asked to be righteous. We're supposed to be filled with righteous anger. We're supposed to put on the full armor of God and go to war for that which is right and good and just, right? There are people who oppose Convention of States, who oppose what we're doing. And the words you will hear them use consistently are fear and scared and afraid and worried. I'm worried about a runaway convention. I'm afraid that the left will take it over. I'm afraid we'll lose our Constitution. I'm just fearful of what will happen. You know what's number one on God's list of things that he hates? Fear. Cowards. Cowards. When I first realized that, I just thought, wow, I had no idea. A friend asked me that. It's much brighter than I studied the Bible much more. He asked me that question. I'm like, I don't know what it is. What is it? Is it like murderers or adulterers? Or I was thinking about what's the worst thing I can think of? And he said, cowards. And I just thought, that's pretty intense. So what does he want? He wants us to fight. That's what America is based on. You guys live in a place so rich with American history from the American Revolution. Now, this is one of the things I really love about coming to the East Coast, because you can go through these little townships and you can find spots that are battlefields, and there are places where the regiments assembled. And we live in Texas. We think we have this incredible history in Texas. We're newcomers, right? In reality, you guys were here. Your heritage was here when this nation was formed, and it was formed by brave, amazing people. It was It was formed by regular people, though. This is another thing that drives me crazy. Our history, we think of Washington, Madison, Adams, Jefferson, Patrick Henry. Like we all know, give me liberty or give me death, right? What did the farmer down the street think about all this? Because he's the guy that had to put it on the line here, right? What did the merchant in the little town, in the little farming town think about it? Why did he pick up his musket? Why was he willing to go fight the redcoats? That's an insane thing. The greatest fighting force ever assembled in human history, and regular people, farmers, merchants, kids, literally, little young teenagers, 14, 13 years old, went out on the field. Why would they do something like that? It's crazy stuff that they did. And there's a lost history in all of this stuff that I think is really important. You know, I love to study American history. I went to school in Los Angeles, California, which means I didn't really actually learn anything real. So everything I know, I've had to backfill in, right? And if you guys ever watch my Facebook Live on Sunday nights, you see I have a big library. I live in my library. That's my office at home. Literally, I bought the house because it has a 2-story library in it. Like, finally, a place for all my books. And I live among my books, and I love books about the American Revolution. And I heard a story about the American Revolution several years ago that was not in any of my books. It was not in any history book I'd ever read about the American Revolution, and I got told it by a friend, and I looked it up online, and you can find it out there. It's about a guy by the name of Captain Levi Preston. Preston was a captain in the Continental Army, and he was there when the shot was fired that was heard around the world. He came out to the field of battle that day. He was just a farmer. He was 23 years old. He had a farm, he had a wife, he had kids. He picked up a musket and he went to fight the redcoats, the most well-trained, well-fed, well-paid, well-organized, fiercest fighting force ever known to humankind, literally. Contextually, think about it if I said to you guys, hey, by the way, there's a battalion of Marines coming to town. Go get your handguns. We're going to have a fight. It's basically what they did, right? And so he did this thing, and we know this story because there was a young historian by the name of Mellon Chamberlain. Mellon Chamberlain was a school teacher, and he was traveling around the country in 1843, so long after the Revolutionary War, and he was trying to find the last living Minutemen. I mean, I want you to think about that. 1843, that's a long time after the Revolution. Most of them would have been in their late 80s and early 90s. And today, we all know people that age. It's not as big of a deal. Back then, you're like Methuselah back then. Average life expectancy for a male is 54 years old, and you're talking people in their late 80s, early 90s. So if you came into a town and you said, hey, is there anybody really old in town? Everybody like, yeah, Captain Preston, that guy is ancient. Right? And he had retired by then to North Carolina. So Chamberlain interviews him. We know this story because Mellon Chamberlain recounts this story in the North Church in Dover, the famous North Church, right, where the Patriots or the Sons of the American Revolution met. And he's there in 1893, 50 years after he collects this story. He's there telling this story in the North Church on the anniversary of the shot heard around the world. They still meet in that church, by the way, on that anniversary. And he's there and he's speaking to the assembled church. And he tells the story of his meeting with Captain Preston. Now, one of the things I love about the story, if you go online and you read the full thing, just look up Levi Preston and Mellon Chamberlain. And one of the things I love about the story is he starts by attacking the media. Like, who would have thunk, right? Like, we say fake media and we talk about how lame the media is in our country. Well, apparently the media back then, their big complaint is the media was always behind on everything. Like, by the time it appeared in the newspaper, everybody already knew it. Right? And so he starts and he says, I collected this story back in 1843, so it's been some 50 years now. I trust that will make it early enough for the Evening Post. So he mocks the media, and then he tells the story of Captain Levi Preston. And he said when he interviewed Preston, he asked him a series of questions about the American Revolution, and that the series of questions he asked framed his personal understanding, Mellon's personal understanding of the American Revolution. And he asked him first, Captain Preston, did you go out to fight on the field of battle that day because of the tea tax? And he said, tea? Son, I was a farmer. We never drank any tea. We drank coffee. Boys dumped it in the harbor, and that was that. So it wasn't the tea tax. He didn't go out to fight because of the high tax on British tea. Then he asked him, well, maybe it was the Stamp Act. You were frustrated having to buy all those stamps, put them on your documents, right? It was actually just a tax. He said, I'm pretty sure I never bought any of those. Governor Bernard locked him in the armory, and I don't think we heard anything more of that. No tea tax, no Stamp Act. This is what I learned in school. You guys probably learned the same stuff in school, right? He said maybe it was the great revolutionary writers, right? You were reading Montesquieu, you were reading Burke, you were reading Thomas Paine, Common Sense. He said, never heard of those men. He said, we read the Bible, Psalms, some of us read the Almanac, but those men you speak of, I don't know those names. So it wasn't the great revolutionary writers that we think of that inspired Levi Preston. It was not because he was mad about tea. It was not because he was mad about the Stamp Act. And so Chamberlain, believing that he already understands the cause of the American Revolution, says, well, maybe just the heavy hand of British tyranny, right? The British were just tyrants. You were tired of it. You were frustrated by it. He said, tyranny, never felt a whit of it. So it's incredible. This is a man who went out and fought the American Revolution. So he asked him, why? Why did you go out to the field of battle that day? And Preston says, son, when we went out to fight them redcoats, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. Them redcoats, they intended that we shouldn't. That's it. That is the simplest, most beautiful explanation of the philosophy of the American Revolution that I've ever heard, told by a simple farmer. Not a politician, not a statesman, not an orator, but a guy who actually picked up his musket and went and fought. He said, you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. I'm a self-governing person. We are a self-governing nation. We are actually the first self-governing nation in the history of the world since biblical times. If you want to find a self-governing nation, you have to go all the way back to the Judges period in the Old Testament where they chose judges from among themselves. You know who would have been able to choose the best judges? God. God would have known. God could have said, God was speaking to them, him and him and him. And instead, God's plan for government was self-governance. That's what he gave to the Hebrew people. Govern yourselves. Choose people from among yourselves that you trust, that you respect, that you're willing to rely on. That's God's plan for us, in my opinion, is the plan of self-governance. We are a self-governing nation. So by the time it comes to Levi Preston, that's all they know. They know how to be self-governing. You know, when I first heard that story, I was so blown away by it. It meant so much to me that I started to dig into it. I wanted to understand more. How does a guy like Levi Preston come to be? How does that happen if that's not happened in world history since the Judges period? How does Levi Preston walk off of his farm and have this idea that he should be in charge? That his family should be in charge, that his community should be in charge? That doesn't just happen. And so I thought I need to read history before the American Revolution. And if you read history, if you try to read history right before the American Revolution or leading up to it, there's a huge gap. Really, if we read history, probably how you guys learned history in school, I learned it in public school, was you got the Pilgrims, right? The Mayflower Compact, Jamestown, we all read about all that stuff. And then the next thing is the American Revolution. How long is that? What's the gap there? Somebody asked me that question at a meeting, 5, 6 years ago. They said, Mark, how long between the Mayflower Compact and the American Revolution? And man, I just shuffled around in the file cabinet in my head and I found an empty, dusty drawer. That's all that was there. I had no idea. I started, 90 years, 100, I don't really know. I was just guessing. It's 158 years. It's a long time. How come there aren't history books? How come we don't really know what happened during that period? And so I started to dig and try to figure out what happened. The guy that first turned me on to knowing what happened in that period the best was somebody, you guys probably know his name, Larry Arnn, who's the president of Hillsdale College, right? Okay, so my daughter's a Hillsdale grad, by the way, so I'm a huge fan of Hillsdale College. So because my daughter's at Hillsdale College, and Patty and I donated some money to the college, we got the privilege of sitting in the president's box at the homecoming game during our first year. So I'm sitting in the president's box, and I find myself sitting next to Larry Arnn. And we're watching the football game. The football game's going on, and I lean over and I go, Larry. And he looks at me, and I said, I have this really important question for you. Yeah? And I said, there's this period. I can't find any books about it or any books written about it. And he said, I have one answer for you. And I said, yes. And he said, shut up until halftime. True story. So I thought it was a little humiliating, but I was persistent. So at halftime, I re-asked the question. He turned me on to some authors who've written about that period in American history. If you're interested, I highly recommend them. Bernard Bailyn, B-A-I-L-Y-N, odd spelling. Bernard Bailyn wrote a bunch of stuff about that period, about how we got to the American Revolution. Another one, and probably my favorite author on that period, is Pauline Maier, another odd spelling, M-A-I-E-R. And so what I started to learn as I started to read it is that they came over to the New World and nobody told them what to do. Right, so they come over here, they bring their Bibles, they bring some knowledge of their government structure in the past. By the way, the Pilgrims get here, and this is a little known fact, you guys should know this living here on the Eastern Seaboard. In Plymouth, Massachusetts is a monument called the Monument to the Forefathers, which I think is the most important monument in the United States of America. It's more important than the Washington Monument, than the Jefferson, than the Lincoln. If you don't know about it, look it up. It is the foundation, the touchstone for the American system of governance. So what I started to read is the Pilgrims brought all this stuff over. They spread these ideas around. The Pilgrims were living and studying before they came to the New World, the Israeli, or not Israeli at the time, sorry, the Hebrew or the Israelites form of government. They understood self-governance when they got here. And by the way, they screwed it up. They got here and tried communism, didn't they? That's what happened. The first settlers got here, we'll just all, pitch in whatever we can and take whatever we need, and they all almost starved to death. Yeah, so then they realized, we should follow the system we were given. Private property is part of that system. So I start to study all this history, and I realize there's this incredible rich history. In fact, I would argue that if you want to understand the United States of America, the most important part of our history is between the Mayflower Compact and the American Revolution. Because everything else is built on that foundation, this idea that we are a self-governing people. Now, those people that came over here from the old world to the new world and carved out a country in new land, in often hostile land, in hostile conditions, sometimes among hostile people, they were just not very brave, right? Would you do that? That was crazy. They had no idea what they were going to face. They faced unimaginable conditions. Of the Pilgrims who came over, half of them died. Like incredible difficulties these people faced. That's your heritage. That's your heritage. That's my heritage. That's who we are as a people. We're made of that stuff. Those were some of the most courageous people ever to exist. It's hard to imagine leaving the old world, everything you know, family, friends, business, culture, everything. I mean, that was, if you think about England at that time, that was the highest level civilization had ever achieved. And they came here and they risked everything. So that's courage. Right? That's the theme. The theme is courage. We come from people of courage. We have to be people of courage. And they build up this incredible nation, right? And we're a nation of pioneers. This is part of our nature, by the way. We came across an ocean. We get to the Eastern Seaboard. We populate the Eastern Seaboard, and we begin to move west. And we continue to move west until we get to the West Coast. And then what do? Space, because we're pioneers. Because that's part of being American. That's part of the nature of what it means to be an American, is we are brave and we are courageous and we are bold and we do things that have never been done before. And we're willing to do things that people say are impossible. When those patriots gathered on that field at Lexington Green and they're going to fight, they are going to fight the Redcoats, that was impossible. Nobody could stand in front of that army. That was impossible. And yet they did it. And we've done that throughout all of our history. We've done the impossible. Many times, right? Think of World War II. We fought fascism. We fought Japanese imperialism overseas. Think about that, right? Some of the greatest fighting forces ever assembled, militaristically, numerically, firepower-wise. We did the impossible. We beat them because that's who we are as a country. I believe part of that is because we are favored by God. Right? And so people, that's not politically correct. I understand. Yes, we're not an exceptional, no, that's not true. This nation is favored by God because the people who founded this nation believed in God, because they were willing to fight for those beliefs, because those beliefs are imbued, they are in our Constitution. The most referenced documents which created our Constitution far more than anything else that the founders referenced, that the framers referenced, is the Bible. You can't read our Constitution. If you read it and you actually understand it and you know anything about biblical history, you know anything about Scripture, you find the Bible in our Constitution. That's our history. That's your history. And especially living here in New Jersey, that's your history. So we've got Levi Preston is us, right? I look in the mirror in the morning, I get up, I look at myself, I think, man, you look like hell. But other than that, I think, that's not George Washington. That's not James Madison. I'm not that smart. God, he's one of the smartest guys ever to live. Washington, the indispensable man, the country could not have been made without him. Do you look in the mirror and think, oh, I'm George Washington? None of us do. Patrick Henry, one of the greatest orators in American history. You know, Henry was such a good public speaker that he was mesmerizing. They would hire people to write down Patrick Henry's speeches, and afterwards they would say, okay, give us the transcript. They're like, I forgot. That happened. The give me liberty, give me death speech, do you know that was never written down? He didn't write it down. He made it off the cuff. They hired 3 people to write that speech down. All of them forgot to write it down because he was so captivating. And so it was written afterwards. We don't know exactly what he said because nobody was actually taking it down as he wrote it. Just a side note, did you know that he and Madison really hated each other? I had a chance to meet James Madison, or the guy who plays him anyway, in Williamsburg. We did a simulated convention in Williamsburg, and they never break character, these guys. They're incredible. And so I was meeting with James Madison, we were chatting, and he said to me, oh, I noticed that you have my friend Patrick Henry on your schedule tomorrow. And I said, yes, we do. And he said, my condolences. So we looked at these figures, Madison, Adams, Jefferson, Washington, all the names we know, Sam Adams, all the heroes of the battlefield. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine myself being one of them. I really can't. These were incredible, iconic people, but I absolutely feel like I could be Levi Preston. I'm comfortable saying, you can't tell me what to do. That's kind of in my nature as an American. For most of us, I would guess that's in your nature. And so to me, that is American history. That's the richness of American history, is that we actually can be and are the Levi Prestons of the modern era. And that's what it's going to take to win this fight. And I do believe we'll win this fight. I do believe the tide is turning. I do believe the army is rising. The goal when we started this organization was way bigger than a convention. You guys know us as Convention of States. If you see people wearing the buttons now, what you'll see is it says underneath, it's more than a convention. We started with just Convention of States, but the idea has grown to we're building the biggest grassroots, self-governing grassroots army in American history. Here's a weird thing. That's done. This is the biggest self-governing grassroots army in American history. There's no other organizations even close. We have 5.2 million supporters and activists all over the country. We have people in every single state legislative district and every congressional district in the United States of America. You guys did that. So a round of applause for you guys. That's not me. So you have accomplished this amazing, incredible thing. The army's in the field. It's not enough. It's not near big enough. I mean, I'm really glad that that's done. It was a weird thing to realize, oh, wow, we've done that. But the reality is, so we say we have about 5.2 million people now. I think that number needs to be 35 million people. And here's why I say 35 million. I'm not just picking that number out of air. Social psychologists, and by the way, when I say the word social psychologist, it kind of gets stuck in my throat because I think they're usually full of it. But here's what they'll tell you. It generally takes about 10% of any given population to convince the majority that something is the right thing to do. So if you're in a church and 10% of your church believes something strongly, that will likely become the dominant thought in your church. If you're in a school, it'll be the same way. If you're in a small town, if you're in a community, if you're in a country. So our country has roughly 350 million people. We don't really know because they fake the census on it, right? But roughly 350 million people. That's why I say I think we need 35 million people. So from where we're at right now, that's 7x growth. And so the question is, how do we do that? How do we save America? And the answer is, each of you that are here, if you're signed up, great. If you're a volunteer, great. Go get 7 more, right? 7x growth. Go get 7 more. We could do this literally if everybody in this organization that already says they support this organization just goes get 7 people to sign that petition and volunteer, then we have the army that it takes to get to convention, to call a convention, to propose amendments, and to ratify those amendments, and to take the federal government and put our very strong, courageous hands around its little spiny throat and shove it back in the constitutional box. Right? All right. I have to show you something before I close, because some of you are not familiar with this. This is a very fat book, and you might be surprised to know that this is the Constitution. Does that look like the Constitution to you? No, it doesn't look like the Constitution to me either, but it says, we bought this from the Government Publishing Office, United States, GPO, Government Publishing Office, says right here, Constitution of the United States of America, Centennial Edition. I'm not making that up. Look at that thing, man. It's like, I lift weights, but mostly I just lift this, right? Where'd this come from? How does this get to be the Constitution? So you probably have a pocket Constitution. Some people in the room carry them with them, right? I carry mine on my phone. It's not long. It doesn't take up a lot of space. When they put it in pretty good sized print, it might be 25, 30 pages inside your little pocket Constitution. So what the heck is this thing? Well, we call this the Courtstitution, because this is every case ever reported by the Supreme Court telling us what the Constitution means. Can you imagine? Now, this is the 2012 edition, and so now we're in 2022. They print them every 10 years. Ironically, they say they don't have any money to print these. I'm not kidding you. Like, only the federal government could do something like that. $40 billion to Ukraine, we don't have any money to print constitutions. So it's over 3,000 pages now with the supplements. And here's what's amazing about this to me, is that there's a premise that underlies this Constitution. One of two premises, actually, which is, number one, either our framers, the men in Independence Hall that wrote that Constitution, were so amazingly stupid and obtuse that they wrote a document that takes over 3,000 pages to explain. Can you imagine you get a lawnmower and it comes with this thing? Can't operate your lawnmower unless you read the 3,000 pages. So the courts have told us you can't understand the Constitution unless you have this. The other potential premise is that the founders wrote a very simple, beautiful, eloquent document. That is true, I think. And apparently we're so stupid and obtuse that we need 3,000 pages to explain it to us. Neither of those is true. The founders wrote a document for the ages, for the common people. It was not intended for scholars. It was not intended for judges. It was not intended for some self-appointed ruling elite. It was intended for you and me. There were a lot of people in that convention that were not the most brilliant people in the world, to be honest with you. We know the superstars, but there were a lot of regular folks in that convention. There were delegates from all the states that had gathered, except for Rhode Island. They were all there. What is it with Rhode Island, anyway? There's no Rhode Islanders in here, are there? Sorry. It's still that way. I don't know. And they created a document that was for us. It was for farmers, and it was for merchants, and it was for laborers. It was for regular people. And this is what the courts have done to it. In this document is the authority for the federal government to do almost everything that you and I see them doing right now. You will hear conservatives say about Convention of States, well, why do we need to do Convention of States? Because the Constitution is perfect and we should just leave it alone the way it is. And my answer to them is, welcome to Fantasyland. Because that would be true if we lived under that Constitution. But we live under this Constitution, and we have to deal with reality, because that's what courage is. When you're courageous, you face reality. And reality says, this is our Constitution. And in this Constitution is Obergefell, which is the gay marriage decision. And in this Constitution is Roe versus Wade, which has resulted in the murder of 61 million plus babies and counting. And in this Constitution are the Commerce Clause decisions that tell us that when you don't do anything, that's doing something, and so it can be regulated by the federal government. That's in here. It says that in here. It's insanity. And the founders gave us a remedy for this insanity, and the remedy was rise up as a brave and courageous people, do what we asked you to do what we told you you would have to do when the time came, call a convention of states, and you get that federal government and you shove it back in the box. Are you guys ready to do that?
Yes!
Okay. I need to apologize to you guys in advance because I'm going to have to blow out of here right at 3 o'clock. And normally I love to hang around and spend time with you guys, but I have a commitment with my family. I hope you guys do this with your families. Even when I'm on the road, I try my best to be home on Sundays. So I'm flying out of Philly tonight. I'll be home for church tomorrow on Sunday with my family and coming back to the Eastern Seaboard next week. But before I go, I'm going to ask you to bear with me. And bear with me because I'm going to put something on you guys. And what I'm going to put on you guys is at the back of the room with the volunteers, you're going to see a form, and that form allows you to volunteer. It's not just enough to sign the petition. It's not enough. I appreciate it if you do. I love you if you do. I appreciate and love every single person who signs the petition. That's a great thing, but it's not enough. Signing a petition will not save the country. Investing yourself will save the country. Doing what these people are doing will save the country. And so I'm asking each of you to ask yourself before you leave this room, can I leave that room and do nothing? Because I hope I've maybe inspired you a little bit. Maybe I motivated you a little bit. Maybe I felt like there's a call upon your life a little bit. I hope all of those things. I hope that God helped me to speak in a way that people would hear. But I'm asking you to do something. Don't leave here without doing something. This is critically important. You know, the founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and sacred honor. You all know that. Like it's almost cliche. We've heard it so many times. It's an interesting phrase. Pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They were facing war. I think we all agree we're facing war. When they pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, we all know that phrase, but the part of the phrase that most of us don't know, the quote that's missing, in my opinion, is the most important part of that quote. What it says is, to each other, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Not to the flag, not to the country, not to General Washington, not to the Continental Army, to each other. I think that's pretty extraordinary. Why? Why to each other? See, because they understood what they were facing. They knew they were going to war. They knew that when they signed the Declaration of Independence, it was a death sentence. They signed their own death sentences. They knew that their farms would be burned, their families would be killed, their businesses would be destroyed, and they knew that the only thing that they could lean on other than the providence of the good Lord himself was each other. And they had to rely on each other. Franklin said, we must hang together or we shall surely hang separately. And they understood that in a very deep and profound way. And so this is something that's really important to me that I say all over the country everywhere I go, which is that we have to do the same thing. I say we're a family, I mean we're a family. I say we're in a war, I mean we're in a war. What would you do for your family in a war? What would you do if your family were under attack? What would you do? What does it mean when you pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor? Every night before I go to bed, every morning when I get up, this is something I think about. And I think that I pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. I do. And I don't think about it generically. I don't mean that I like to the cause or in some big flowery way. I mean to you, and to you, and to you, and to you. Everybody I meet out here. Because you guys are willing to put the time and the energy in. The truth of the matter is, in all of this stuff, and I'm the least important person. I come in, I get the applause, and people appreciate me. My job's the easiest job in the world. You guys have the hard work to do. You guys are on the ground, day in and day out in a blue state, where it can be really rough, right? By the way, Massachusetts just passed in 2 committees, I'm just saying. So, it can be done. So when I think about you guys, that's what I think about. I think that I pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. I've committed my life to this. I'll quit when the shovel of dirt hits the top of my box. That's when I'll quit. Until then, I'll be in the fight. Never know how much time the Lord gives us, brother. I'm just saying. So I pledge that, and what I hope is that you'll look around the room, you'll think about what you're doing, and you'll ask yourself that question: what am I willing to do? Am I willing to pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor? And I hope that inspires you to go fill out that form and put your name on that line. And no matter how busy you are, no matter what else you got going on, no matter how many things you got going on in your life, and say, I got to do something. I got to do something. Because we take care of our own. We're in the fight. I see somebody back there with a Marine Corps t-shirt. Nobody gets left behind. Right? We're in this together. We're in this fight together. Coming back here, I feel like I'm coming home. Pastor, thank you for sharing your house with us today. I appreciate you guys. God bless you. Thank you.
Great.